Fantastic.
So perhaps I should jump in at this point and start my little session. Before I begin, though, okay, I'm going to web tour you to one page that relates to building bridges and crossing them. This is the home page of one place that I'm going to mention, which is the Cultura project at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Now, I'd like to ask, can everyone see me scrolling down the page? Because I've checked the follow me box. Does that work? No, you cannot. Okay, so I'd like everyone to scroll down the page that I have put in the web tour and find the place on the page that says goals. And I'll read aloud from it. The objective of Cultura is to help students understand the values, attitudes, beliefs, and concepts inherent in another culture, to understand how people interact, look at the world, and frame their thoughts and ideas. These goals are epitomized by a phrase from Marcel Proust, which serves as a beacon to our project. La seule véritable exploration, la seule vraie fontaine de jouvence ne serait pas de visiter des terres étrangères, mais de posséder d'autres yeux, de regarder l'univers à travers les yeux des autres. The only true exploration, the only true fountain of youth would not be to visit foreign lands, but to possess other eyes, to look at the universe through the eyes of others. That dimension of culture is very difficult to teach because it's very elusive, abstract, implicit, and essentially invisible. The famous American anthropologist Edward Hall referred to it as the silent language, the hidden dimension. So this whole idea of crossing the bridge and looking back at your own culture is very much a piece of those people who are on the cutting edge thinking about how to help students interact with the community of practice. Okay, I'm going to head back to my slides here. I'm focusing on technology, which I find sort of hard to do in this lesson because community of practice interaction with students is not something that you can just take off the shelf. It's not a piece of technology that you can sort of apply. So you might find that my approach is a little bit different in this presentation. Let's go ahead. I'm going to talk about 4 trends in world language education that support the idea of telecollaboration, 4 kinds of software that match each of these trends. Then I'm going to talk about strategizing learner and community of practice interaction before you choose technology, and finally KISS for success. All right, so talking about 4 trends in world language education that have bearing on learner and community of practice interaction. These 4 trends are task-based communication, ACTFL's culture C, collaborative learning, and ACTFL's communities C. So taking these one by one, let's talk about task-based communication. Task-based communication emphasizes more learner-to-learner interaction rather than learner-to-teacher interaction, and it could also mean learner-to-community of practice interaction. The interaction is goal-based rather than form-focused, so they're trying to accomplish some transfer of information from one place to another. One way to think about it is that you're changing the world by using language. You're changing the world somehow. Information will pass from one vessel to another as a result of the communication. And finally, in task-based communication, task design emphasizes interdependence. Here's what I mean by this. Imagine an online forum where you have students each post their own phone number. In that task design, each student is simply contributing to the forum and sort of showing that they know how to say their phone number. You can transform this activity by creating interdependence between the contributors, changing the task, saying, first, listen to the person before you. Then, tell us which phone number they gave us. Then, leave a mystery phone number for the next student, and that student will tell us what number you gave us. So the first thing they have to do is to listen to the student before them, understand the number, and then perform a reverse lookup, presumably just by popping the number into Google, and then come back and tell everyone, Mikey gave the phone number of Pizza Hut, and then you give another phone number, and then the next person looks that number up. So by simply tweaking the design of the activity that way, you've created this interdependence, which means that the students really are communicating with one another. The information is flowing between the students rather than just being a demonstration of what they know how to say. Okay, the technology that corresponds to this task-based communication, I would say, would be any asynchronous discussion platform using voice or text, such as Michigan State University's Conversations, which is a rich internet application that enables you to assign your students to join an online conversation, to record and leave their contribution to an asynchronous conversation. Now, I'm not going to tour you there now, but in the TED Ed lesson, there's a direct link, and you can go check out MSU's Conversations. All right. So moving on to the next of my 4 trends, that is Axel's Culture C. And the Culture C emphasizes experiencing other cultures, developing appreciation of the relationship between languages and other cultures and the student's native culture. So this takes us back a little bit to that building the bridge and crossing the bridge, looking back at your own culture through the lens of the other culture. And I mentioned Kultura as a technology. There are platforms for telecollaboration to build intercultural competence, such as MIT's Kultura. But I would say that at present, those platforms are not highly developed. I'm going to talk just a little bit about some of the strategies that are used in Kultura, because most of us are teaching beginning or at the highest intermediate language, so our students' communicative capacity is kind of limited. We wouldn't really expect them to engage in a high-level discussion, high cognitive order discussion of politics or something like that with the target community. But even for students at a lower level, even though Kultura is for third year and above French students at MIT, it was originally developed for them, there are still some strategies in Kultura that can make some really interesting things apparent. So for example, if you're lucky enough using a Kultura model to connect with a group of native speakers, such as a class studying English in Ecuador, for example, then using the Kultura model, you might ask each of the groups, your students as English speakers and the students in Ecuador as Spanish speakers, to react, to give you word associations to one word. Let's take the word, for example, libertad in Spanish, liberty or freedom in English. So you would give the word freedom to your own students, and you would give the word libertad to the students in Ecuador, and you would ask them to come back with 3 words in that language that they associate with that. So the Ecuadorian students would be giving words that they associate with libertad, and the American students would be giving words that they associate with the word freedom. Then when all those results come back, patterns start to emerge that show that even though those 2 words are dictionary translations of each other, the cultural values that underlie them are actually quite different. And these come out even in this word-level communication. It's not sentence-level or paragraph-level communication. It's simply reading words that the other side associates. The next step in the Kultura model would be for the 2 sides to view the results, to look at all of the associated words in the 2 languages, and then to have an online discussion about differences that they saw, trends that they saw in each of the groups of words. Now, depending on our group of students, that kind of discussion might or might not be possible. But there's one other aspect of the Kultura model that brings it into reach for us, and that is, in the Kultura model, each learner participating in the exchange uses their own first language to make postings in the discussion. So you end up having a bilingual discussion, all of which is native speech. In other words, you're not asking your students to try to express themselves in the target language. Rather, they're producing, the same things that they would say every day, and it falls to the other side to try to interpret what they're saying. So it's more of an interpretive than a productive task, in a sense. And then at the same time, so they might engage in the discussion once, and then when they go back to class, they're no longer in the online discussion. Then class time would be used to discussion. In other words, your class would be privately meeting to try to interpret, to try to grapple with the postings that the other side had made in the target language. And of course, the teacher could scaffold this quite heavily, depending on the level of the students. So Cultura is really a fascinating model for intercultural communication and has several features to it that allow some adaptability in terms of student level. So I encourage you, and I've given a link to Cultura in the TED Ed lesson in the Dig Deeper. Okay, I'm going to move on now to collaborative learning, which we certainly heard Dustin talk about quite a bit today. I didn't fine-grain distinguish between collaborative and cooperative learning because I guess one could say it's a blend. Just like Dustin suggested, it's kind of a technical difference. What I'm talking about mostly is collaborative authoring. That is, multiple authors working on one project. So I guess that is more collaboration rather than cooperation. Project work with a division of labor. Now, the thing that can make a project like this work well is when the group is focused around a single need to know. And so what that involves is before you start working on a collaborative project, the students have become excited about an idea. So rather than the teacher trying to impose, the teacher has to be very clever and try to create some kind of awareness-raising event that gets the students fired up and they want to know something, and then they're going to definitely contribute to their group work. Now, it's quite obvious that if you want collaborative project, you're going to look for a technology that allows collaborative authoring, such as Google Apps for Education. Just a few years ago, this was not such an obvious thing, and it wasn't very easy to make a collaborative document, a wiki-type document. But now Google Apps have become such an essential part of education that it's almost old hat, so I won't spend much time on this. The fourth trend in language teaching that I wanted to talk about was ACTFL's Community C. And here we really are talking about learner with community of practice interaction. So the Community C says, extending learning experiences from the world language classroom to the home and the multilingual and multicultural community. One important aspect of this is that it says the home. That means ACTFL is really thinking about the heritage population of learners. And if you have heritage learners in your classes, they are a really valuable asset for, say, bringing in guests to the class to interview them. Now, as far as technologies that can access communities of practice outside your classroom, these educationally oriented sites such as the Mixer and ePals that Herman was mentioning, ePals, that link learners to online communication partners in virtual exchanges can be really great. They're preferable to open market sites such as LiveMocha because, of course, you can't guarantee the safety and security of your students unless you're using an educationally oriented site. All right. So moving on, I'm going to go beyond the technology a little bit because if I just talk about those devices, then you're left with a bunch of problems that we sort of need to untangle. And those problems are all related to fleshware. That is, human factors in using the technology. The first one is what I just mentioned, keeping learners safe. Taryn is chiming in and saying that she's used LiveMocha and it's a cool option too. As long as you can guarantee that students are secure and not interacting with your friendly neighborhood serial killer, then of course it's fine, and it all depends on the policies of your school. But one really, really important point is building relationships with communities of practice. As a busy teacher and a teacher who is physically remote from the learners that you're teaching, I think it's a real challenge to develop a relationship with a community of practice that you can bring into your teaching and learning situation. Now, at the college level, many of us think of telecollaboration in terms of finding a class overseas that wants to do an exchange with your class. But from a logistical standpoint, it's a real challenge. You have to reconcile your calendars, You have to figure out which student is going to pair with which student. You have to have a virtual space in which those pairings can operate. And here you are teaching online, which it means that all your learners are isolated one from the other. They don't have the same sense of being a group that a face-to-face class does. So since all of these things are such challenges, we need some strategies to deal with these obstacles. And my overall suggestion is falling back. That is, strategies to KISS, keep it simple, silly. So by falling back, there's several aspects to falling back. And what I mean is, instead of a full-on one-to-one, group interaction, which requires a lot of complicated logistics, you can simplify in several ways that may make it more manageable for you to successfully integrate the community of practice into your classroom. The first is technological, and that is choosing to use a simple messaging technology such as WeChat or even email rather than relatively bandwidth-intensive technologies such as Blackboard Collaborate that we're using today. If you tried to connect with a classroom on any other continent using Blackboard Collaborate, in a high bandwidth country like South Korea, it wouldn't be a problem. But in Burkina Faso, where Taryn mentioned someone was doing Peace Corps and they want to connect, I don't think Blackboard Collaborate is going to be a very good choice. So making a technology choice that makes sense is very important. The second falling back strategy has to do with logistics. Number one strategy is to interact in a single collaborative space, such as a Google Doc, rather than in separate messages. Now, I know I just mentioned emails. If email is a technology that makes sense, that's fine, but you're only going to be able to manage it if you tell your students specifically, email with your partner, but CC me on every message. And the problem with that is, number one, only that pair is interacting. They're not publishing to everybody. Only the two of them are seeing that. And you're going to end up with a gajillion emails that you have to figure out how to organize. And so email can be quite difficult. The next one is to partner students with one person rather than with a whole group. So instead of going group to group, since you're in this isolated, atomized online environment, it's probably a better strategy to have students ePal one-to-one than to try to make your group into a group to interact with another group. A face-to-face group would be much easier to get the class all together, put on a single webcam, and have a sort of an arranged meeting group to group. All right, one more falling back strategy has to do with the mode of communication. And you can keep communication manageable by pre-planning language. So instead of saying, okay, we'll meet online at 8 o'clock Eastern time, oh, that's 4 in the morning in Europe, whatever, you're going to have your students prepare language, plan language, maybe by creating a survey. And so the communication is in the form of them presenting a survey and then interpreting the results of the survey. There wouldn't be any one-on-one conversational interaction. Your communication would be in those other modes, presentational and interpretive. And another one, so then you're gathering responses for delayed processing. The survey responses become the language that your students are accessing rather than having to process it in real time. And then another related concept is to minimize the open-endedness of the conversational interaction, or that's what a survey does too. It minimizes the open-endedness. It's not like anything at all can happen. There's only a few choices. So that makes communication more manageable. Oh, finally, falling back strategy is scaffolding. If your learners are conversing directly with members of the community of practice, then you need to probably provide heavy scripting that they can use, because in the moment when they're trying to make their utterance, trying to interpret what the other person is saying, they really need something to rely on. All right. So in this general field, I see a direction emerging that is that there's a marketplace for this kind of learner to community of practice exchange. And one outfit that solicited me recently is Talk Abroad. I think I can briefly web tour you to their page. Just one moment. As you will see, Talk Abroad is making grants. They are giving teachers money at 3 different levels. They're accepting proposals for spring 2016. And what they want to do is, this is a kind of software sort of like LiveMocha or like ePals that manages interaction between learners and community of practice, that is native speakers, students in other countries. But they're trying to offer themselves not as sort of a free market like LiveMocha is, but rather a platform that makes this learner to community of practice interaction part of a regular curriculum. So this curriculum development grants level 1 that you see is probably the most accessible of the grants, and that is you're going to propose to make interaction with native speakers part of your curriculum, and they'll give you a grant to explore that possibility. All right. And then there are other providers that are sort of in the same mode, same business, that are appearing increasingly at the ACTFL conference and in publications. So that's pretty much all that I have to say. Whoops, and I'm going to leave you there and open it for questions. Okay, I'm going to ask a question of everybody. Might it be possible for you in your current situation to, for example, let's say that you have a topic which is typical of beginning to intermediate instruction, such as clothing, and to create with your students a survey about clothing, and it could be sort of focused on differences between clothing worn by genders. So, for example, the survey could be about how many days a week do you wear long pants? And then they would have a selection of 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. Short pants, skirts, t-shirts, all the different pieces of clothing. And so you would make this survey in the target language with your students, and you would have 1 copy of the survey for your own students to finish. We're just talking about using a Google form to do this survey. And then you would take that same survey and use another copy of it, separate copy, to send out to a group of target language speakers that you somehow have access to. Say through a friend in the target country, you ask them to distribute it to a group of their friends, a group about the same size as your class. Then you have 2 separate sets of survey results that you can bring back and talk about in class. And you can get your students to say things about differences between what they wear every day and what the people in the target culture wear every day based on that very small sample. Would that be a possible activity for you to carry out? If you think that it would be possible, then I'd like to see a show of hands. Just hit the hand button like I am. Seems like it would be manageable for a portion of the group. I'm interested in hearing from other members who don't think that it's so possible about what obstacles might need to be overcome, or what part of that idea is kind of difficult. He has noted that the language forms can prevent even communication at a very simple level. My response, Jenny, would be that the students don't have to have total control of the language forms that they are putting out in the survey. As long as you help them build the survey, you build it together, and you know that they understand all the questions, then all they have to do is understand the question in order to click their choice to respond to the survey. That doesn't mean that they have full productive control. Roman, can you expand on the climate in Russia question? In other words, are you saying that it's sort of... yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, Russia is a little bit different. It's probably more of an exception. But, you know, in Russia, I mean, you would wear shorts sometimes, but for a very short period of time. So most people would probably say then they never wear them. So that may present a lot of challenges that, you know, and we actually talked about this in Russian classes where some students say, or fur coat, oh my gosh, you know, I've never even seen one, you know, or where would I wear one? So that's kind of, and in Russia, that's a lot of people wear them, or they wear like fur jackets and things in the winter. So it presents a couple of challenges, but I also think it's actually a decent way to learn the clothing vocabulary and stuff, because, you know, that way it's just more of a game for them, and they can just, you know, see if they know all the words, and if they're comfortable with them, if they know what they mean, and things like that. So yeah, I mean, I think you can definitely incorporate it, and just kind of be ready for some exceptions.
Thanks, Roman. Okay. Oh, let's see. Who has raised a hand? First, I think the hands that I'm seeing are leftover votes. So I'd ask everyone to clear their raised hand unless they have a comment. Dustin? Okay, you've cleared yours. All right, Rosa, go ahead and jump in. Click your talk button to talk.
I think this is a great idea, and many classes who using a book, it's called Galasa, where we have a chapter, clothing, and students learning, this is the beginning Russian, and they learning all clothing part. And we had conversation with over Skype with students from different areas, from Moscow, from Siberia, and from Black Sea area, what they are wearing. And we had very interesting conversation, and we found that students who was in a class in North Carolina, but some students in that class originally from Ohio, from northern area of United States, and they was said, yeah, when they come to North Carolina, this is completely different than they was at home in Ohio, for example. And we got this conversation with Russian students, and we agreed that this is just myth that Russia everywhere it's cold, and United States is everywhere it's warm. Okay.
Did Blackboard Collaborate work okay across the Atlantic, speaking to people in Russia?
No, we using Skype.
Skype is not allowed that in North Carolina public schools.
I was using Skype.
I see. Thanks for that. Roman?
Yeah, Steve, I just wanted to clarify something. The conversation sessions that Rosa mentioned, it's actually part of the class, and we have a couple of conversation coaches right now with us, Eugenia and Jenny and Rosa. Uh, those are part of the class, and we use Blackboard Collaborate for it. But obviously, if it goes beyond that, then a lot of people use Skype and things like that. But in CVPS, our school here doesn't really allow Skype. But anything extra, obviously, you can use that, and that's what a lot of people use for just personal communication and stuff.
That brings to mind that your language coaches, the tutors that the students meet with outside of class, really do fulfill this role of a member of the community of practice in the sense that they aren't really the same as the student's teacher. And so as an instructor, an online instructor, you can take advantage of that and treat them as sort of a data source along the lines of what I was talking about, asking the student to interview and get information from that person as a representative of the population of native speakers to get insight into cultural practices. Great. Well, I think that brings my portion to an end. Bridget, are you there, and would you like to jump in?